Have you ever heard a voice that you know, a voice you trust, call your name when you are utterly and completely alone? I'm not talking about a whisper on the wind or a trick of the mind. I mean a perfect, crystal-clear imitation of your mother, your partner, your child, a voice beckoning you, pulling you toward the deepening shadows just beyond the safety of your home. If you ever hear it, I'm begging you, do not answer. Do not even turn your head. Because whatever is out there, it's learning, it's practicing, and it wants you to let it in. I learned that lesson 18 years ago when I was only 7 years old, living in a farmhouse so isolated you could scream for a week, and the only thing that would hear you would be the crows. The school year had just finished. My parents were both gone to work before the sun had even properly risen, and the world was mine. From the kitchen window looking out over the sea of trees that bordered our property, I saw it. This wasn't some fleeting shadow, some trick of a child's overactive imagination. To this day, the image is burned onto the inside of my eyelids. It was a creature, I suppose that's the only word for it, perched about 15 feet up in the gnarled branches of an old oak. It was colossal, easily the size of a small car, and it sat in a way that defied nature. Its posture was that of a gargoyle, hunched and coiled, its powerful back legs spread wide, and its front limbs held close together. But there were no stone wings, no simple carving. This thing was alive. Its body was a disturbing tapestry of short, coarse fur like a bear's, interspersed with patches of owl-like feathers that ruffled in a non-existent breeze. No skin was visible, only this grotesque mosaic of mammal and bird. The head was massive, shaped like a bear's skull, but where a snout should have been, there was the suggestion of a huge, formidable beak, though it was hard to be certain. My focus, my entire world, was consumed by its eyes. They were monstrous, each the size of a basketball, and they weren't solid. They looked like dripping, swirling pools of oil, constantly in motion, blurry and unfocused, yet intensely fixed upon me. It was early morning, the summer air still holding a cool crispness, yet the light was bright and clear. There was no mist, no fog to obscure my view. I saw it from the kitchen, and then, compelled by a morbid curiosity that only a child can possess, I ran onto the front porch to get a closer look. I was still 50 yards away, a distance that felt both terrifyingly close and mercifully far. I knew I had to see more to understand. I ran back inside, my heart hammering against my ribs, and grabbed my father's heavy binoculars from his study. When I returned to the porch a few seconds later, it was gone. Vanished. The tree was empty, the woods still. There was no sound of its departure, no crashing of branches that a creature of that size should have made. It had simply ceased to be there. And like the fool I was, a brave 7-year-old boy on a mission, I marched out to the very spot where it had been. As I got closer, the world changed. The normal symphony of the forest, the chirping birds, the rustling squirrels, the buzzing insects, it all just faded away. A profound, unnatural silence descended. Our woods were always loud, bursting with life day and night, but in that spot, it was as if sound itself had died. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that pressed in on my ears. I stood beneath the branch where it had sat. There were no broken limbs, no claw marks, no feathers, not a single sign of its presence. It was just an old oak tree in a dead silent patch of woods. For 18 years, I've searched for answers, scoured books and forums for any mention of a cryptid that matches what I saw. I found nothing. It was a singular horror, a monster that appeared for a moment and then dissolved back into the fabric of reality, leaving behind only an impossible memory and a silence that I can still hear in my darkest dreams. This next experience isn't mine, but it's one that solidified my belief that the world is far stranger than we're taught. It happened in the summer of 2010. At my stepdad's old hunting cabin deep in the forests of Pennsylvania, a 10-minute drive from even the relative civilization of Cook's Forest. The cabin is small, just a common area and a single bedroom packed with bunk beds. My mom, my stepdad, and I were there for a weekend of thankless labor, clearing out trash left by other family members and making repairs. The other cabins nearby were all empty. We were utterly alone, miles from the nearest streetlight, with no cell service to speak of. This was truly off the grid. We arrived Friday, worked all through Saturday, and planned to leave Sunday. Saturday evening, after a long day's work, we sat around a bonfire. As the flames died down and the sun disappeared, the forest transformed. It became a wall of absolute pitch black, and a dead quiet fell over the land. Not even the hum of insects. It was a silence that felt watchful. We decided to head in for the night. My stepdad and I were reading, lost in our books, when my mom stepped outside for one last cigarette and to make sure the fire was safely reduced to embers. A moment later, we heard her yelp. It was a sharp, startled sound, one I'd heard before when she'd seen a snake or a spider got too close. I didn't think much of it at first. But then she stumbled back inside, limping, her face pale. "Someone threw a rock at me," she stammered. The words hung in the air, instantly changing the atmosphere from peaceful to menacing. My stepdad didn't hesitate. He's a man of action. He grabbed his handgun from the nightstand and bolted outside, ready to confront whoever was lurking in the dark. I sat there, stunned, trying to comfort my mom while my stepdad circled the cabin, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. He fired a few warning shots towards the back of the property, the sound echoing unnervingly in the silent woods. We saw nothing, heard nothing. No one ran off, no twig snapped. The thing is, there was nowhere for anyone to come from. The nearby cabins were vacant. We were miles from any road where someone could have parked. A person would have had to trek through a pitch-black forest with no light, no path, and no destination just to throw a single rock at a stranger. It makes no sense. We joke about Bigfoot now whenever we go up there, a way to diffuse the lingering tension of that night. But deep down, we all know something was out there with us, watching from the impenetrable dark, something that wasn't just a person messing around. I was 18, visiting my aunt in Albuquerque. She lived in a small bed and breakfast with a vast open field stretching out behind it. On my second night there, sleep wouldn't come. Around midnight, a sound began that crawled under my skin and stayed there. It was a bizarre, unholy mix of a howl, a scream, and a cry, and it was deafeningly loud, even from inside the house with the windows closed. My aunt's cats, normally placid, were on high alert, their ears swiveling, their bodies tense. I had to wake my aunt. In the 10 years she had lived there, she said, she'd never heard anything like it. And she's an insomniac, often awake at all hours of the night. As the horrifying sound continued, relentless and unwavering, she started to move toward the door, intending to go outside and investigate. I grabbed her arm. "I don't think so," I said, my voice shaking. We stayed inside, prisoners in our own home, while that terrible sound echoed through the night, only fading as the first light of dawn broke the horizon. Later, we learned that the owner of the B&B, who was out of town, had also never heard it. But some of her friends offered a chilling theory. They had heard rumors of someone in the area playing recorded sounds on a loop, trying to lure people out of their houses for some unknown, nefarious purpose. That was the only rational explanation we could find. The next day, I walked out into that wide, empty field. I found nothing. No tracks, no discarded speaker, nothing out of place. So what was it? Was it just a cruel prank? Someone trying to prey on the vulnerable? Or was it something else? Something ancient and predatory, using a sound it had learned was effective to draw its prey out into the open. I don't know which possibility is more terrifying. My hometown is a small, remote dot on the map, nestled next to a Native American reservation. I grew up with the kids from the reservation, went to school with them, and became accustomed to their stories and beliefs, stories that the modern world often dismisses. I moved away before high school, but I visited family often. My grandmother owned a camp on a small lake, a quaint little place that was idyllic during the day. But when darkness fell, it transformed. On one side of the camp, we had neighbors for miles. On the other, a wall of dense, dark woods. My cousins and I, one a year older, one a year younger, always felt a palpable sense of dread emanating from those woods. We'd venture in, but an overwhelming feeling of being unwelcome would quickly drive us out. One night, my aunt was driving me and my cousins back home down those remote, winding lake roads. The dense forest crowded in on both sides of the pavement. We saw nocturnal animals, of course, but then we saw something else. It wasn't large, not like the creatures you hear about in most stories. It was maybe the size of a large coyote, but this was not coyote country, and it looked nothing like one. It was crouched on its hind legs on the side of the road, just watching the world go by. As our headlights washed over it, it turned its head slowly to look at us. Its face was chillingly blank, almost like an owl's, but instead of a beak, it had the short muzzle of a bear. Its body was a crude, malformed parody of a human. Its legs bent backward like a horse's. Its feet had long, splayed toes like an alpaca. Its arms were disturbingly long, the most human-like feature about it. The creature was covered in patchy, matted, wiry fur. I've seen animals with mange. It's a pitiful sight, but this was different. This wasn't a sickness. This was its natural state. As we drove past, it didn't chase us, not really. It began to trot behind the car, its unnatural gait keeping pace with us for an unnervingly long time. We were all freaking out, screaming and shouting, but a cold part of me, a part that remembered the old stories from my reservation friends, felt a chilling sense of recognition. I knew deep down what I was looking at. Years have passed and I'm still haunted by that image. What was that thing on the side of the road? A creature stitched together from nightmares. And are there precautions one should take after seeing such a thing to ensure it doesn't decide to follow you home? It was the dead of winter, December of 2017. I was camping with a few friends just outside a Native American reservation near St. George, Utah. None of us were native, but we tried to be respectful of the land. We had a simple A-frame tent, and every night we'd pack in like sardines to stay warm. I was always on the outside edge. Coyotes are common there, but they're pack animals that usually give campers a wide berth. You hear them, but you rarely see them. Yet every single night that week, we saw a lone coyote. It was old and mangled, its gray fur patchy, its skin blistering. It looked like it was on the verge of death and walked with a pronounced limp in its front left paw. It would just circle the edge of our campsite, watching us. One night, I went to bed feeling particularly on edge. Around 3:15 a.m., I woke up to a sharp stabbing pain in my ear. It turned out to be a beetle that had burrowed its way in, but in my half-asleep state, the sudden, acute pain felt like an aneurysm. I started freaking out, hitting the side of my head. I woke up my buddy Seth, who was next to me, and asked him to shine a light in my ear. As soon as he woke up and his eyes focused, he didn't look at my ear. He looked past me and his face contorted in absolute horror. "What is it?" I whispered, afraid to turn around. He didn't answer. He just reached above his head, fumbled for a small mirror he kept in his pack, and held it up so I could see behind myself. Reflected in the glass was a man. A scraggly, ancient man with long gray hair standing just inside our tent. A huge, grotesque tumor bulged from the side of his face. His clothes were torn rags, and he leaned heavily on a cane, his body stooped. He walked with a limp, the exact same limp as the coyote. He seemed completely oblivious to us, as if he were looking at something in a different dimension that just happened to occupy the same space. He had no weapon, but that didn't matter. We instinctively clutched our knives, our eyes locked on him for what felt like an eternity. Then, as silently as he appeared, he just wandered away, back into the darkness. The next morning, the other two people in our tent told us they'd had a dream. An identical dream. They both dreamed that our friend Chris, who wasn't even on the trip with us, was tied upside down to a tree. A massive glowing silver elk was slowly, methodically gutting him alive with its antlers. In the dream, the four of us, along with other friends, sat naked in a circle around the tree. We weren't chanting or drumming. We were just watching, as if we were part of a sacrifice. They both had the exact same dream, down to the smallest detail. Independently, they drew pictures of it, and they were identical. The order we were sitting in, the number of branches on the tree. When we finally got cell service, we texted Chris. He replied that he had been up all night, throwing up violently for no reason he could explain. I don't know if we saw a skinwalker, if we were targeted by some ancient curse, or what happened in those woods. But I know that the boundary between our world and another, much darker one, grew terrifyingly thin that week. I think I had an encounter with one of its kin, far from the traditional territories. I lived in Phoenix at the turn of the century. I had two friends, a guy and a girl, who grew up in Globe, a place steeped in strange lore. One night, the girl wanted to do a spell to make it rain. We drove out to a spot on the Salt River, a strange place with a parking lot, a pavilion with a concrete dais in the middle inlaid with a compass rose, and man-made concrete rapids in the river itself. We arrived after dark, around 9 p.m. The parking lot was nearly empty, save for two dusty, abandoned-looking cars. There were no other people in sight. We set up our minimal spell on the dais, a single candle and some incense. We stood there, concentrating in the silence. Then I heard it. A sound that didn't belong. It was the sound of men and women laughing together in perfect, unsettling unison. Then, two voices began speaking rapidly in a language I couldn't understand. And finally, a sharp canine howl cut through the night. The hair on my arm stood on end. All three of us snapped our heads toward the parking lot, standing stock still, listening. But there was nothing. The sounds had vanished. We tried to go back to concentrating, but the atmosphere was shattered. I figured the people from the cars had returned, but the combination of the voices and the howl was deeply odd. After we finished, we started talking about it. That's when it got truly strange. Of the three of us, the girl had only heard the speaking voices. The guy had only heard the laughing. I was the only one who had heard both the voices and the howl. When I told them what I'd heard, they both went pale. Their entire demeanor shifted from curiosity to sheer panic. "We have to get out of here. Right now," they said, their voices tight with fear. I told them I had to use the bathroom first, which was right by the pavilion. They were furious, practically vibrating with anxiety, and banged on the door in a total panic after I'd been in there for less than a minute. They were acting like we were in the final scene of a horror movie. We scrambled into the car and peeled out of the parking lot. Once we were safely on the road, I asked them why they had been so terrified. They told me that there are things that live out there, things you don't want to know about. Apparently, people who grow up in Globe learn to deal with this kind of thing. The guy told me more stories about his childhood there, things that made my blood run cold. He never used the word skinwalker, but after I read about them years later, I finally understood the primal fear I saw in their eyes that night. My maternal grandmother was always what you might call superstitious, though she wasn't religious. She was a firm believer in the paranormal, a trait she inherited from her mother, who was full-blooded Navajo. My grandmother grew up in Nevada and had never been east of Montana. One year when I was in grade school, we went to visit her. The visit was mostly uneventful, typical old people stuff, except for one strange habit. She always kept her curtains drawn tight, and throughout the day, she would constantly peek out the window. Whenever we asked what she was looking for, she would just mutter, "It's watching me." This continued for the entire visit. A few days before we were set to leave, my grandma and my baby brother, who is 19 now, were in the front yard planting flowers. Suddenly, my grandmother started shouting, a raw, terrified scream. "Get away from that creature! It's not safe!" We all ran outside, assuming my brother had stumbled upon a rattlesnake or a scorpion. But what we saw was far stranger. My grandmother was pressed against the side of the house, clutching my little brother, shaking uncontrollably. Standing in the middle of the yard was a dog. It was a huge jet-black dog, the size of a Great Dane. It wasn't growling or barking. It was just staring at my grandmother with an intensity I have never seen before or since. Its eyes were a deep burning yellow. It looked up at the rest of us as we came out, gave a little huff of air, and then bounded off. It moved with an unnatural speed, disappearing into the desert scrub in seconds. When my mother asked my grandmother what had happened, what was wrong, she just kept repeating the same cryptic phrase over and over, her voice trembling. "The yellowed one has found me." 2 weeks after we left, she sold her house and moved. I suppose this story might seem boring in comparison, but it just happened, and it's unsettling in its subtlety. I was rock climbing in Colorado with two other guys. I was on the ground, belaying one of them, when the two of us on the ground heard something that made us freeze. The commands we use for safety are very specific. When the climber reaches the top, they shout, "Belayer's name, off belay." This lets the person on the ground know it's safe to unclip the rope. The proper response is, "Climber's name, belay off." Our climber was about 40 meters up on a 50-meter route, far enough that his voice would normally be faint. The rope had stopped moving, which isn't unusual. He could have been struggling with a move or setting up an anchor. Then we heard it, a voice, clear as day, that sounded like it was coming from just off to our left, way closer to the ground than our friend could possibly be. And it said, "My name, off belay." It was a perfect imitation of our friend's voice. I looked at the other guy on the ground with me. His face was a mask of confusion. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. We both knew our friend was high up on the rock face. We shouldn't have been able to hear him that clearly, and certainly not from that direction. The rope still wasn't moving. My training, my every instinct, screamed at me to keep him on belay. It was the only safe thing to do. If it wasn't him, taking him off belay would be a death sentence. So I waited, feeding slack through my device just in case. A few moments later, the rope started moving again. Then we heard a faint, distant call, barely audible from high above us. "My name off belay." It was the real call, from the right place, with the right faintness. We have a friend who was seriously injured a few months ago when someone on the ground made that mistake, taking him off belay when he wasn't secure. I remembered seeing a video once of a hiker who heard a woman's voice calling him off a trail into the woods, a voice that sounded impossibly close. He got out of there fast. I'm starting to wonder if there's a cryptid out there, something that has learned to mimic human voices, using our own calls and commands to lure us into danger. I don't know what we heard that day, but I know two things for sure. One, it's a very good thing I didn't listen to that first voice. And two, whatever it wasn't a person. These events took place 2 summers ago, in the Grand Teton area. My boyfriend Harry, now my husband, was an avid outdoorsman and a military veteran. I was an ecology major, eager to spend more time in the wilderness. He decided to take me on my first backpacking trip, a 25-mile journey through grizzly country. The signs were everywhere, and my only previous bear experience was seeing a small black bear from the safety of my car. My nerves were shot from the start. Harry looked like a character out of an adventure movie, with a machete on his belt, knives on his pack, and bear spray strapped to his waist. The beginning of the trail was a grueling uphill climb. In bear country, you're supposed to make noise to avoid startling them, but carrying a 40-pound pack up a steep incline makes conversation difficult. About an hour in, as we neared the top of the ascent, I noticed the woods had gone completely, unnervingly silent, save for the rush of a nearby stream. Silent woods are a bad omen. They mean a predator is near. I was in front of Harry at this point. We exchanged a knowing glance, both sensing the shift in the atmosphere. As I crested the hill, I froze. Sitting not 10 feet in front of me, directly in the middle of the trail, was a grizzly bear. Harry was still behind me and couldn't see it. In my terror, I couldn't speak. I just started flinging my arm wildly behind me to get his attention. The bear rose from a sitting position onto all fours, its eyes locked on us. Harry quickly moved me behind him and started yelling, the kind of deep, commanding yell he learned in the military. The grizzly was unfazed. It started walking slowly, deliberately toward us. My heart was about to pound out of my chest. The bear was now only 5 feet away when a loud crack echoed from the woods to our right. The bear heard it too. It stopped, its head swiveling toward the sound. A second crack, this one much closer. The bear bolted, crashing through the undergrowth toward the stream. Probably just falling branches, Harry said, but neither of us believed it. We started walking quickly up the trail, trying to put distance between us and whatever had made those sounds. Suddenly, the hairs on the back of my neck stood straight up. At the same moment, Harry stopped in front of me. He turned to look at me, and I turned to look behind us. Back where we had been standing, there was a large, dark mass. It was easily 3 times the size of the grizzly we had just seen. Its back was to us, and then, impossibly, it stood up on its hind legs. It had the vague shape of a bear, but something about its proportions, its form, was just wrong. It was unnatural. Running was a stupid thing to do, but it's exactly what we did. We could hear heavy, thudding footsteps behind us, but we didn't dare look back. Eventually, the footsteps faded. I was a mess, and Harry was trying to console me. He assured me this was extremely unusual. Not an hour later, we stopped in a clearing for a snack. A minute after we sat down, I saw bushes moving in a line, coming toward us. An adolescent grizzly, looking just as spooked as we felt, burst out of the brush and came straight for us. Harry, in a moment of what I can only call insanity, charged back at the bear, screaming, "Bear spray at the ready!" It worked. The bear veered off and ran. But the terror of the day was far from over. That second night was worse. Before our trip, we had to register our planned route with the ranger station. They usually send a ranger on horseback to check on hikers. We had been following fresh hoof prints all day, but we never saw the ranger. I was having foot problems, so we lost valuable daylight adjusting my boots. By the time we started again, it was getting dark fast. My headlamp was dead, so we only had Harry's. We needed to find a place to camp. We were exhausted. It was freezing, and the wind howled through the trees, making it impossible to hear anything else. After another hour of hiking in the dark, we found a clearing. It felt more like a bowl sunken into the landscape. The place felt wrong. Harry admitted later he felt it too. There was no moonlight, just the beam of his headlamp. Half the trees in the bowl were dead or fallen, a stark contrast to the dense, living forest around it. To ease my anxiety, Harry played music on a small speaker, but it just echoed eerily off the dead trees. Then we noticed it again. The silence. The same oppressive silence from before our grisly encounter. We turned off the music and got into the tent. As soon as we were settled in our sleeping bags, we heard deep cracks and thuds echoing from beyond the tree line. "Falling trees," Harry whispered, trying to rationalize it. Then a loud thud. That one wasn't an echo. It came from inside the clearing. Thud. It was right outside our tent. We stopped breathing, clinging to each other in the dark. Something thin, almost like a finger, dragged slowly across the outside of our tent, making a clear indent in the fabric as it went. "What is it?" I whispered, shaking. "A person," he replied, his voice strained. "We're the only ones on this side of the mountain." I was trying to stifle my sobs, listening. I could hear steps, but I couldn't decipher what was making them. The steps stopped. Then the whole side of the tent was slowly pushed inward. Whatever it was, it knew we were there. I shined my flashlight at the side of the tent. What I saw made my blood run cold. Pressed into the thin fabric was the distinct shape of a human face. I could see the outline of a nose, an open mouth. Each time it breathed, the tent wall around its mouth billowed in and out. Harry said, "Forget this," and pulled a Glock from his sleeping bag. He cocked it, and the sound shattered the silence. The face pulled back. We heard fast footsteps, running toward the edge of the clearing. We didn't leave the tent until the sun was high in the sky. The first thing we noticed was the smell of urine. Someone or something had peed on the coals of our dead fire. Footprints circled our tent over and over again, and muddy handprints, or at least we hoped it was mud, decorated the outside of our tent. The wildlife, we learned, is not the most dangerous thing in the backcountry. This is entirely true, though I'm a cynic about most paranormal things. I believe in Sasquatch, but that's a different story. I live in the foothills of western North Carolina in my folks' cabin, surrounded by 15 acres of woodland. These are the woods I grew up in, and despite a general aversion to nature, I feel safe in them, except for one particular area. Our cabin sits on a steep hill that slopes down to a creek. About halfway between the house and the creek, just behind our fenced-in backyard, is a small patch of woods. It's always in shade, with no thick undergrowth, just trees and red clay. But it feels deeply, fundamentally wrong. I feel unwelcome there, and I'm not the only one. My parents avoid it. Our pets, past and present, have always steered clear of it. When I was about 8 or 9, I decided to try camping in the backyard. I set up a tent 20 feet from the house, loaded it with blankets and comic books. Even as my mom helped me set up before the sun had even gone down, I felt uneasy. That shady patch of woods was just weird. As soon as it got dark, I heard it. Loud, rhythmic crunching, like something large walking on 2 legs, circling just inside the tree line. We don't have bears here. It just kept walking, never approaching the fence. I lasted less than an hour before I ran back inside. When I was 11, my mom, an avid gardener, decided to build raised garden beds in the backyard. I was roped in to help. I noticed that we both became incredibly edgy and irritable back there. We're best friends, my mom and I, but we would snap at each other constantly while working on that garden. I also realized for the first time that the woods behind the house are deathly quiet, a silence that presses in on you. The garden thrived for a while, but Mom would always ask me to go with her when she tended it. Years later, she admitted she just couldn't be down there by herself. Eventually, we just abandoned the project. Those beds are still down there rotting. The creepiest experience happened when I was 13. Mom was cutting my hair in the backyard for easier cleanup. I had a pixie cut at the time. As I sat on a stool, that old familiar feeling of unease washed over me. We were not welcome. The trees stood still and shadowy, and it felt unnaturally cold despite the sunny day. Mom finished up, and as she stepped in front of me to admire her work, 3 things happened in quick succession. First, I felt a squeezing pressure on my lungs like I couldn't breathe. The whole oppressive atmosphere of the place pressed in on me. Second, my mom's face went slack. Her smile faded. Her eyes became glassy and vacant. Then, with that empty expression still on her face, she reached out with the scissors and snipped a deep cut into the skin just over my left eye. In that same instant, the third thing happened. She seemed to snap out of it. Her expression changed to horror. She was almost in tears, apologizing over and over. We ran back to the house, leaving everything behind. I still have a small scar. There wasn't even any hair hanging over my eye for her to cut. It was a deliberate, mindless act. I haven't been down to that part of the backyard in a decade. Sometimes I look down the hill towards that shady patch of trees, and I feel that same shudder of apprehension. It's a 50-square-foot patch of land that we own, but it doesn't belong to us. And we just pretend it isn't there. I live in a super rural area and walk my dog in the dark every night. Tonight was different. Things felt off from the moment we stepped outside. 2 feet from the door, I felt something wet and squishy under my foot. I looked down and there was a slug, except it didn't look like a normal slug, right in the middle of my shoe. I have no idea how it got there. As I'm trying to process this, my dog starts freaking out, growling at the house across the street. She does that sometimes, so I didn't think much of it and went inside to change my shoes. The second I walked back outside, I was hit with a wave of wrongness. The first time, I had heard faint, quiet music, which I'd dismissed as the neighbors. This time, the music was gone. In its place was an incessant, high-pitched shriek that would sound off periodically. My dog and I just stood there, frozen, for a full minute, listening. There was the shriek, and then another sound, like a high-pitched bark, but it wasn't a fox, and it wasn't any dog I recognized. The worst part was the silence in between. If you live in the country, you know it's never truly silent. But tonight it was dead quiet. I tried to record it on my phone, but it didn't pick up the sounds very well. As soon as I stopped recording, my dog went insane. Hackles raised, growling, barking, jumping at something behind us in the yard. I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted for the door and ran inside. I slammed it shut and immediately felt a wave of relief, as if I had just escaped something that was chasing me. I don't know what happened tonight, but it scared the hell out of me. When I was younger, I was in the local scout group. One memory from a camp at an old scouting campsite stands out. We were playing a World War II themed game at night. Each team had to attach a colored string to the enemy base without being caught by the leaders with flashlights. Instead of following the main group down the path, I decided to flank around, deep into the woods. It was longer, but safer. Deep in the forest, on my way to the enemy base, I heard the whistle signaling the end of the game. I started a leisurely stroll back to camp through the darkness. I can't remember if I saw or heard at first, but my attention was drawn to a short silhouette walking through the woods about 20 feet away. Assuming it was one of the younger scouts, I decided it would be funny to scare them and made a low growling noise. Immediately, the silhouette stopped dead in its tracks and turned toward me. In the dark, I couldn't make out any features, just the blacked-out silhouette of a child. After it noticed me but made no sound, I continued making growling noises. The silhouette just turned around and began to walk away, clearly unfazed. I figured I'd just follow them back to camp, but after only a few steps, the figure literally face-planted into the ground. I jogged over to make sure they were okay, but when I reached the spot where they had fallen, there was no trace of anyone. I looked around, confused, listening for the sound of someone scrambling away, but there was nothing. They had just vanished. On that same camp, I remember my friends and I found an old leather briefcase that had been churned up by some heavy machinery that had cleared part of the woods. Inside was a really old scouting uniform, the sand-colored military style, along with some loose badges and personal items. I don't know if it was related to the boy I saw, but it adds another layer of strangeness to a night that I still can't explain. To understand this, you need to know where my family comes from. We fled the Yugoslavian War in 1999, moving from a small village in eastern Serbia to Switzerland. The region we're from, on the border of Bulgaria and Romania, is soaked in a history of bloodshed. Roman emperors, Attila the Hun, Vlad the Impaler, they all fought and ruled on that soil. The land was occupied for centuries by the Ottomans, then ravaged by 2 world wars, which killed a third of the population. Guerrilla groups formed, killing even more. The land remembers, and in that part of the world, magic is not a fairy tale. Vlaska magica, or black magic, is considered one of the most potent forms of black magic in the world, and many people still practice it religiously. My grandfather grew up in a small 300-year-old house deep in the forest there. He was an orphan, adopted by my great-grandfather, a resistance leader who fought in both world wars. 50 years after he left, after everyone else who lived there had died, my grandpa still goes back to that house and stays overnight. The place creeps me out even in broad daylight. There's an aura there, a heaviness. I can't imagine sleeping there, but he does, and one day he told me a story. He said he often gets visitors at night. One night he woke up to a hand crawling over his head. It was a huge, pale white man kneeling beside his bed, speaking to him in a calm voice in Vlaski, the dying local language. He said the man's skin was glowing white in the dark and he was completely bald. The hand felt soft. My grandfather, who has always respected the dead, was never afraid. He said he didn't speak back, but just enjoyed his company, knowing somehow that the visitor wasn't evil. Another time he was putting his tools away in the barn as it got dark. He heard loud noises from the attic. Then a plank was thrown down the stairs. Another time, a rock was thrown from the attic into the wheelbarrow he was pushing. He told me he just turned around, locked the barn, and didn't even flinch. "They expect you to react," he told me, laughing. "Don't give them the pleasure. It makes them go crazy." Growing up with these stories, I became a teenager who questioned them. One day, I took my old motor bicycle and drove out into that same forest, towards that same old house. I don't know why. I was thinking about the old vampire legends of the region. My grandpa always said not to go out past dark. I thought it was just to keep me from getting lost. As a teenager, I felt invincible. I drove deeper, the dirt roads vanishing into mere trails between the trees. I noticed my hand on the handlebars felt wet. I thought it was sweat. The region gets very hot. I looked down. My hand was covered in blood. Not a little, a lot. I thought maybe I'd squished a bug, but there was far too much blood for that. I frantically checked my hand for a wound, but my skin was perfectly intact. My heart started hammering. I spun the bike around and drove back as fast as I could. Every second, I had the overwhelming urge to look behind me, a certainty that someone was sitting right behind me on the bike, just waiting for me to fall. When I got home and told my grandpa, he just started laughing. And he said, "Never question their abilities again." Everything happened this summer while I was working in the Chicago area. I met a great guy at my new job, we'll call him Paul. We hit it off and he suggested we go hiking in a nearby forest. I'm from Russia. I practically grew up in the woods, so I was excited. As we started hiking, a torrential downpour began. We went deeper and deeper into the forest until there were no more paths and we were wading through swampy water. As we were talking, we stumbled upon the wooden skeleton of a teepee. And then we both heard it. Someone crying. It sounded like a baby. It was distant, and we knew animals can make similar sounds, so we kept walking. Within seconds, the sound was right next to us. It seemed impossible for it to have moved so fast. It was so loud it could have been just a few feet away. We looked everywhere, up in the trees, all around us. There was absolutely nothing there. We started speed walking in the other direction. As soon as we stopped to catch our breath, the sound started up again, right beside us. It was like something was hurting us, telling us to get out. So we did, we ran. Later, we looked up the history of that forest. It turned out to be the site of ancient Native American burial grounds, and also the place where 3 young boys were brutally murdered and left in a ditch. A few weeks later, Paul couldn't stop thinking about the cry and wanted to go back. At night. I thought it was a stupid idea, but his friend Ryan joined him and I went along to try and keep them out of trouble. We got there around 11 p.m. It was pitch black. We crossed a small wooden bridge that led into the deepest part of the forest. As soon as we crossed, I was hit with a profound feeling of guilt, like we were intruding, disturbing something. Ryan, who had been cocky and confident, suddenly stopped. All 3 of us were overwhelmed with a sense of dread and panic I've never felt before. Then we heard crunching leaves coming toward us from the darkness. Ryan, the confident one, looked terrified and whispered, "I think we should go back." We turned and practically ran back over the bridge. When we got to the road where our car was parked, I saw a girl, maybe in her early 20s, walking along the highway. She was wearing very little clothing, and her walk was strange. She seemed to be almost vibrating. There wasn't a building for miles, My Malaysian stepdad told me stories about ghost women on the side of the road, but I couldn't just leave her. I convinced Paul to slow down. I called out to her from the window, asking if she needed help. The girl slowly turned. The creepiest, slowest smile spread across her lips as she nodded. That same feeling of dread hit me again, but I'd already committed. She got in the back seat right behind me. Ryan started chattering, flirting with her. The entire time, she kept steady, unblinking eye contact with me, even while Ryan was talking to her, with that slow, creepy smile still undulating in that snake-like way. She said she was coming from a bar, but there were no bars for miles. She gave us an address 15 minutes away by car, along a road bordered by nothing but forest. My eyes physically hurt from holding her gaze. When we dropped her off on her street, which was full of old, small houses, I turned back to look at her a second later, and she was completely gone, vanished. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept imagining her smiling face, undulating in the shadows of my room. About 3 years ago, I was on a family vacation to the extremely rural eastern Washington, visiting Lake Chelan State Park. It was around 11 p.m., and my mom and I, both into photography, drove down a deserted dirt road above the park to take pictures of the full moon. The night sky was incredible with no light pollution. There were no clouds. We were completely alone. We got out of the car and started taking pictures, the only sound being the click of our shutters in the eerie silence. About 15 minutes in, we were both facing away from the moon, looking at the rolling hills, when we noticed a strange concentration of light on one hillside about a quarter of a mile away. Before either of us could even point it out, the entire mass of light, which had been brightly illuminating the hillside, simply rolled away into nothing. It took less than 2 seconds. One moment, the hill was lit up as if by a searchlight, and the next, it was dark. We both saw it. There were no other cars, no roads for headlights, no moving clouds, no houses. We freaked out and got out of there as fast as we possibly could. We still have absolutely no explanation for what we witnessed that night. I was on patrol one night in my town when dispatch sent us to a place none of us had ever heard of, Searnan Lake. We couldn't find it on any maps, and dispatch had to guide us to a back road that was barely visible from the highway, mostly overgrown with grass. Someone had reported a woman screaming inside a motel there, and that 2 men had gone into the room and not come out. When we arrived, it wasn't a town so much as a cluster of 8 buildings, one of which was a gas station with no pumps. A small group of people were standing outside the motel. At first, we didn't hear any screaming. The people outside were useless, all saying they just woke up because of the noise. As soon as we opened the front door to the motel lobby, the screaming started again. It was incredibly loud, a painful, piercing shriek that made us run toward the room it was coming from. We yelled, "Police!" and burst in. The instant the door opened, the screaming stopped, just gone. The room was completely ransacked with deep scratches on the walls but no blood. The bathroom was pristine. The closets were empty. We found nothing. We radioed in that the scene was clear but strange. We went back to the station and wrote our reports. To this day, investigators have no idea what happened. We've never heard anything from that lake town again. But ever since that night, I've had sleep paralysis frequently. I hear scratching on my walls and footsteps in my house. I have terrible nightmares. None of this happened before we went there. Our small-town department can't afford body cams for everyone, so we have no footage. I lean towards it being some kind of elaborate, pointless prank, but it just seems like too much effort. I still can't find Searnan Lake on any map. It's like it doesn't exist, except in my nightmares. A couple of years ago, my dad and I went on a spontaneous road trip. After driving for hours, we pulled into a gas station in the middle of nowhere around 9 p.m. We couldn't find a single motel nearby, and my dad was exhausted, so we decided to sleep in the car at a small rest area. I was on my phone for a couple of hours, but around 11 p.m. I felt suffocated in the car and stepped out for some air. I was texting a friend when I saw a large cornfield across the road. Being a city guy, I'd never seen one up close, so I decided to walk over. As I got near, I felt like I was being watched, but I brushed it off. I was standing in the dark next to a tall cornfield. Of course it felt weird. Then I noticed a barn, large and white with red or black stripes, tucked in next to the cornfield. Being young and stupid, maybe 14 or 15, I decided to check it out. I jokingly texted my friend that I saw something and was going to investigate. As I got closer, I did see something. It was behind the barn, but sort of peeking around the side like someone peering from a corner. At first, I thought it was just a bell hanging on the barn. I kept walking closer. Then I saw it clearly. It was the head of something or someone just looking around the corner at me. I froze completely. My flight or fight response just shut down. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at this thing staring at me. After about 10 seconds, the notification sound from Snapchat on my phone snapped me out of it. I turned and ran as fast as I could back to the car. My dad was still fast asleep. I thought about waking him, telling him we had to leave, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. The part that haunts me the most is how tall it was. Whatever was peering at me from around that corner was at least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. The memory of it fills me with a sense of dread and paranoia to this day. I know what I saw was real, and it has completely changed how I see the world. I want to know what else is out there, lurking in the dark, just beyond the edge of our understanding. I'm a sheriff's deputy. Part of the job is becoming unfortunately familiar with the smell of a decomposing human body. It's similar to an animal carcass, but with a distinct, cloyingly sweet odor. Last night, I was patrolling a remote, sparsely populated area of the county. I was driving through the mountains about 25 miles from town on a straight stretch of highway through a wide valley. The weather was nice, so I had my windows down. As I passed the entrance to an old logging road, that familiar smell of sweet rot suddenly flooded my car. It wasn't just a whiff. It was a thick cloud, as if a week-old corpse was sitting in the passenger seat next to me. But this time, there was something else mixed in, something I couldn't place. It lingered for a moment, then vanished. My heart sank. I pulled over, turned my car around, and drove slowly back. The closer I got to the logging road, the stronger the smell became. I parked and radioed dispatch that I was out of my unit, not saying why. I shined my flashlight into the ditch near the road and saw the opening of a concrete culvert running under the highway. The smell was overpowering right there. Holding my breath, I leaned over and shined my light inside. The tunnel was empty. Relieved, I stood up and looked around. The smell was so strong it felt like I was standing right on top of its source. I crossed the highway to check the other side. As I walked away, the smell grew faint. Then I heard a sharp crack in the brush behind me and the smell engulfed me again, even stronger than before. I froze. The air was dead still. A shiver ran down my spine. In the distance, I saw headlights approaching. As the car came near, the odor seemed to move, retreating farther into the bushes where I'd heard the crack. The car stopped and the passenger asked if I was all right. I lied and said I was. As they drove away, I walked briskly back to my car and got the hell out of there. Once I had cell service, I called my friend, another deputy patrolling the other side of the county. I explained what had happened. After a moment of silence, he asked about the unusual hint of something else in the smell. He asked if it was sulfur, and suddenly I knew. That's what it was. I asked him if he thought I'd found a demon in the middle of nowhere. His response was a very serious, very concerned, "Yes. This guy is the son of a missionary. He's been all over the world. He said he has smelled this before, and that it was a very, very bad sign." His response, so out of character for him, spooked me more than the smell itself. Maybe there's a scientific explanation, but honestly, I think I agree with my friend. I think there's a demon in that valley. This happened when I was about 9 years old. I always used to hang out with my oldest cousin, who was 7 at the time. I was spending the night at my granny's house, which was right next to a forest. Around 10 p.m., we decided to walk to the edge of the forest, feeling adventurous. I was leaning against a big tree, just looking out into the darkness. My cousin was right beside me. Suddenly, far in the distance, I saw a pair of red eyes just glowing in the dark. I turned to my cousin and asked if he saw what I was seeing, but he ignored me. I looked back and the eyes were much closer. I blinked a few times, but they stayed there, 2 red points of light in the absolute blackness. I turned back to my cousin and asked again, but he just kept ignoring me, staring straight ahead. I looked at the eyes one last time, and they were closer still. Then they started moving toward me, steadily, silently. I never heard a single sound, no rustling leaves, no snapping twigs. It was just these 2 red eyes floating through the dark, coming right for me. I grabbed his hand and we ran as fast as we could, not stopping until we were back in the light of the street lamps. It's been 16 years, and I've never experienced anything like it again, but the silence of its approach is what haunts me. Whatever it was, it moved through the forest like a ghost. I've lived in rural Massachusetts for most of my life and have encountered plenty of wildlife. One day I was moving my mare to another pasture, a 15-minute walk down the main road. The road is very rural with dense forest on both sides. Suddenly, my mare just stopped, refusing to go any further. Annoyed, I dismounted and decided to lead her. As we rounded a corner, I saw what she had seen. Less than 15 feet away from us was a large black bear. We made eye contact and my heart dropped into my stomach. I was 16 years old, barely 100 pounds, staring down this massive creature. And I had a horse with me. I wasn't supposed to, but I slowly started walking backward, pulling my mare with me, never breaking eye contact. Once we were back around the corner and out of sight, I scrambled onto my mare's back and we galloped back to my house. I've had a lot of strange, borderline paranormal encounters in the woods, but nothing is more terrifying than coming face to face with one of Mother Nature's true predators. I lived in Germany for many years when I was a kid. My father was stationed there with the U.S. Army. I made friends with some local boys whose parents owned the town's dairy farm. We were always exploring the vast forests. One night I stayed late at the farm and left for home around 9 or 10 p.m. It was dark, but the moonlight was bright. I lived just across a soccer field and then a small cornfield from the farm. As I was walking through the soccer field, I saw a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye along the tree line. I picked up my pace. As I turned to take my usual path through the cornfield, I saw them. At least half a dozen dark silhouettes emerged from between the rows of corn, blocking my path. I froze. They just stood there, silent and still. Then, another one was suddenly standing right behind me. Before I could even react, he asked in German where I was going. I turned around and what I saw surprised and relieved me. It was a team of Special Forces operators decked out in so much tactical gear I couldn't believe how stealthily they had moved. They had night vision goggles, packs, weapons, even a dog. Apparently, they were using the small towns and forests for off-base training. I will never understand why they chose to break cover and reveal themselves to a 9-year-old kid. They could have just let me walk by, but they all walked me home that night. It started off as one of the creepiest moments of my life and ended up being one of the coolest. My family used to go camping with a group of friends when I was a kid. One Christmas, when I was about 5, we were camping out in the bush. There were 9 kids at our campsite, and our parents let us wander, giving us a walkie-talkie to call us back. We never went far. Out of nowhere, an unfamiliar man's voice came over the walkie-talkie. He said he was Santa Claus and that he was trying to find us to give us our presents. He asked us to look for him. We all ran back to our campsite, ecstatic, shouting that we had just talked to Santa. The walkie-talkie was immediately taken from us, and we weren't allowed to leave the campsite for the rest of the trip. At the time, we were devastated, but now, as an adult, I understand the chilling seriousness of that moment, and I am so glad that we didn't go looking for him. A few years ago, my sister-in-law and I were hiking a section of the North Umpqua Trail in southern Oregon. It was mid-fall. We reached a flat section of the trail running just above the river and stopped to take some pictures. I immediately felt extremely uncomfortable, like we were being watched. I slowly turned my head to look behind us, up a small incline. Through the trees, I could see a small meadow. In the meadow was a tent, an old canvas style, and strung from the trees all around the tent were bones like creepy death wind chimes. My stomach clenched. I leaned into my sister-in-law and whispered, "Do not turn around. Just continue walking up the trail and run when I tell you to." We started walking. We got maybe 10 yards when I could hear footsteps coming from behind and above us. The forest floor there is covered in thick moss, which makes a very specific sound when you walk on it. I told her to pick up her speed. She did. I did. And so did whoever was behind us. I leaned forward again and told her to run as fast as she could and not to stop. For 2 middle-aged, slightly overweight women, we ran like our lives depended on it. We could hear them keeping pace for a while just out of sight in the dense woods. We probably ran for at least a mile after we could no longer hear anyone behind us. We eventually made it to the trailhead and called the local sheriff. A few days later, he came to our house. He told us we weren't crazy. Someone really did chase us. I asked him what they found. He looked at the floor, then looked me dead in the eye and said, "I'm not going to tell you what we found or who it was. Because if I do, you'll never hike anywhere ever again. What we found was not normal and it won't happen up here again. He then instructed me to never ever hike unarmed again. I was never a gun person, but I am a living person, and I'd like to stay that way. I never found out what was in that meadow, but I took his advice. A few nights ago, 3 of my friends and I went for a Nasho run in a national park in Sydney. At the halfway point, we hit a pothole and got a flat tire. We pulled over on a long, dark road with no cell reception. We had a spare tire, but no tools. About 20 meters away was a parked car, which was strange since we were miles from any house. As we were trying to figure out what to do, we heard a group of friends laughing nearby. My friend Nate and I decided to walk over and ask if they had a change kit. We walked the 20 meters to the parked car. It was empty. We turned on our flashlights and followed the sound of laughter down a gravel road. As we turned a corner, we saw her, a woman standing with her back to us. The group laughter had completely stopped, leaving us in dead silence in the middle of nowhere with this woman. She looked normal, so I approached slowly and said, "Hey!" She didn't turn around or react at all. Nate continued walking toward her, stopping about 5 meters behind her. I yelled out, "Oi!" Again, nothing. We couldn't see her face, but something felt deeply wrong. I looked at Nate, and he just stood there. Under his breath, he muttered my name and told me to go, repeatedly. I turned and started walking back. By the time we passed the parked car, we were both running. Back in our own car, I asked him what happened. He said a woman just shouldn't be standing there by herself in pitch darkness in the middle of nowhere. She didn't react to our voices or our flashlights. He just felt an ominous presence. After we finally managed to change the tire, we drove back to the spot where we had seen her. The gravel road was empty. The woman was gone. No more laughter, just silence. We all heard the laughter, but only Nate and I saw the woman who made it stop. I was on a casual night walk in the woods with my friend, sitting on a bench next to a river. I started to hear a soft, tingling sound like a small bell ringing. At first I ignored it, but it kept getting closer and more frequent. I told my friend and he confirmed he could hear it too. I looked in the direction it was coming from, expecting to see someone on a bicycle or walking a dog. The moon was bright and I could have seen a silhouette, but there was nothing, just the sound of the bell getting closer. Out of nowhere, my gut screamed at me that we should leave. I told my friend and we started to walk away a little faster than usual. After a moment of silence, the bell suddenly rang out, seemingly just 2 meters away from us. We both just started running. We could hear it ring close behind us a few more times, and then it suddenly stopped. Later, when we were back in the city, we realized something strange. I had clearly heard the sound coming from my left, but he had heard it coming from his right. Only when it got close, when we started running, did we both hear it coming from the same place behind us. I've never experienced that weird gut feeling of pure danger before or since. I was hiking in the White Mountains when I walked into what looked like a scene from a horror movie. It was around 7 a.m. when I found the campsite. The first thing that hit me was the eerie stillness. Then I saw the shredded tent and the human figure covered in blood, whimpering quietly. The person looked like they'd lost a knife fight with a 4-armed man. Deep slashes from shoulder to hip, puncture wounds up and down his back, and his hands and forearms were full of defensive cuts. I patched him up as best I could and then hightailed it to the closest road, which was thankfully less than 2 miles away. I flagged someone down, and about an hour later, rescue arrived. The story that eventually came out was this. The guy had decided to go camping for the first time. He'd heard you were supposed to hang your food from a tree to keep bears away. He did that, but he hung it almost directly over his tent, and not nearly high enough. The night before I found him, a bear had used the tent and its occupant as a climbing aid in an attempt to get to the food. The guy had woken up to 4 black bear paws sinking into his body as the bear shifted and clawed its way up the tree. The guy survived and swore to the hospital staff that he was moving to the city and never going into the woods again. I distance hike, which sometimes means being out in the pitch dark. My scariest experience happened at about 4:30 in the morning. I was on mile 5 in a low, muddy bottom between 2 steep ridges, completely hemmed in by thick undergrowth. I was just focused on the small circle of light from my headlamp when I heard a loud crack, and I froze solid. The sound was not a branch breaking. It wasn't deadfall. It sounded like a decent-sized wooden stick being violently whacked against a small tree. It was an intentional sound. It was explosive, so loud and sudden. I had the sense that it was about 50 yards directly in front of me. My immediate thought was, if I hear that again, I'm turning around and going back in a hurry. I knew that in about 30 yards, the trail made a 180-degree turn to go up the ridge. This meant that I was going to have to turn my back to whatever made that noise. After a few minutes of dead silence, I cranked up my headlamp and started to slowly creep toward that turn. As I made the bend, moving as fast and quietly as I could, I smelled it. A stench of wet, rotten death. It was like days-old decomposition, but it just smelled strange. I didn't stop moving until the sun was up and the birds were chirping. I've heard and smelled just about everything the wilderness has to offer. I'm telling you, I don't know what that was. When I was 9 for my birthday, I got tickets to go to Disneyland Paris. After the Buzz Lightyear attraction, I begged my mom for one of the toys and she bought it for me. I played with it a lot. About a year later, it started to make random sounds and shoot its laser at night, for no reason. I would be in bed and see the red light flashing on my wall and hear its voice. Nothing was touching it. I was so scared I asked my dad to get it out of my room, so he put it in the basement. Our basement is right next to the downstairs toilet. One night, around 2 or 3 in the morning, I had to go to the bathroom. I was terrified of the dark, so I always carried my cat with me. As I walked downstairs, the exact moment I passed the basement door, my Buzz Lightyear doll started shooting its laser and talking from behind the closed door. I ran into the bathroom terrified. Even while I was in there, I could hear its noises. It almost sounded like it was getting closer, like it was coming up the stairs. I don't remember how I got out of there. I probably just made a run for it. But it was the most horrible night of my life, knowing I was the only one awake in the house with that thing. I want to tell you a story about my mother's encounter with a doppelganger. It was about 9 years ago when she was working a late shift as an accountant. At about 11:20 p.m., she went to the break room for a quick coffee. As she was walking, she saw a person who looked exactly like her walk past the end of the hallway. She thought her tired eyes were playing tricks on her. She got her coffee and went back to her workstation. But when she got to her desk, the doppelganger was already there, standing right by her computer, just looking at the screen. My mother was terrified, frozen in place. Luckily, a security officer was doing his last rounds and saw my mom standing there, staring into her office. He touched her shoulder, which brought her back to reality. The officer looked past her, and he saw the doppelganger too. He seemed to understand immediately what was going on. He escorted my mom out of the building. When they were outside, he explained to her that it was a very bad omen, and he told her she needed to find a new job. She did. She quit the next day and got a promotion at a new company 2 months later. She never saw her double again. 4 years ago, we had to live with my mom's friend for a while. The day we arrived, we were moving our things in. I went out to the car to get one of the last boxes. When I went outside, sitting in the driver's seat of the car, clutching the steering wheel, was my mom's friend. She was wearing a red dress and her hair was down. I knew it wasn't her. I had just seen her inside the house 10 seconds earlier. Her hair had been up in a bun, and she was wearing a light pink sweater and white pants. I ran back inside and found my mom and her friend talking in the kitchen, exactly as I had left them. I told them what I had seen. We all looked out the living room window where the car was visible. Nobody was there. We didn't leave the house for the rest of the night. I live in Sweden, in a house that's about 100 years old. My dad decided to start a bee farm in our backyard, using our tiny shed to process the honey. The room can only fit about 2 people. We were in there putting labels on the jars of honey. The labels are on a huge scroll. My dad went outside for about 10 seconds to get some air. I could see him the entire time. When he went out, he put the scroll on top of the desk. When he came back in, he asked me where I put the scroll. I told him he put it on the desk, but it wasn't there. We looked everywhere in that tiny room. Behind the desk, in each drawer, outside on the ground. It was gone. The room was so small it was impossible for something that large to just disappear. There is seriously nowhere for that thing to have gone. This happened a year ago and it still freaks me out. My family usually tries to find a logical explanation for strange occurrences, but this incident cannot be explained. I was 9 years old and it was the week before school started. I was depressed about it. Kids had started to bully me. My mom took me on a day trip to the local nature preserve. I wandered off the main trail and found this old, overgrown path. It passed between 2 trees that arched toward one another like a doorway. Then I came to a huge hedge too high for me to see over. The path led right up to it, and there was a fissure in the hedge, just wide enough for a child to fit through. I peeked inside. It was lusciously green and cool, a welcome escape from the stifling Nebraska heat. I squeezed into the fissure. The earth on the other side was soft and springy. What I saw was the most beautiful place I have ever seen. The sky was pearl blue. A vivid green bank sloped down to a dry creek bed overgrown with ferns. A huge fallen tree trunk spanned the creek like a bridge. On the other side was a forest of silvery trees. All the sounds from the outside world were hushed. The place filled me with a joy I hadn't felt in a long time. I braced my hand on the outer wall of the hedge, with one foot still firmly planted in the real world, because somehow I knew that if I put both feet on the other side, I could never go back. It was so hard not to walk in. I had never wanted anything so badly. But then I thought of my mom. I thought it would be a gift to show her this place, and we could go in together. As I had that thought, the fissure in the hedge began to close, pressing against me. I was forced to choose. I pulled myself back out with an effort. Branches tore a hole in my t-shirt and scraped my arm. I went back and found my mother and insisted she come with me. But now it was difficult to find the trail. When I finally found the two trees that were like a doorway, they were strung with nasty cobwebs, and the trail beyond them had disappeared entirely. I pointed in the direction of the hedge. Sure, she would be able to see it, but there was nothing, only the usual trees and undergrowth. It was impossible that it had ever been there. My mom didn't doubt me. She just said, maybe it was just for you to see. I felt a profound sense of loss. That was my chance to enter the fairy realm, but I turned back. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you have an experience of your own, something that you can't explain, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales from the shadows. Stay safe out there, and whatever you do, don't answer if you hear your name called from the dark.